I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. This is an old idea made new. One story written by one guy and recorded in one single, flawless take. SKALD is an ongoing story, but there's nothing wrong with starting here with this episode. Once you're hooked, you can always check out the backstory with previous podcast episodes or by picking up the prose volumes available exclusively on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, Part 73. The mercy blow failed. It didn't fail to connect, though. It didn't fail to hit. Master Ho didn't fail to feel the quivering flesh of Hung, or whatever it is that he had become. No. As Ho, taking a low stance, had driven both fists forward, one over his head and another at chest level, he had seen them land exactly where he had sent them, exactly where he had seen them land while in the throes of his ecstasy, while willing the world into the shape he desired, the shape that he needed. He drove his lower fist into the monster's bulging, jiggling stomach, and the upper into the creature's bony, protruding sternum. A blow he had practiced endlessly in his younger days, a blow that he had demonstrated to his students time and time again, but always pulling his punches, always afraid of letting loose the true power of that devastating maneuver. He hit his students only hard enough that they would know the power he possessed, the power he had cultivated, the power that if they were loyal, were dedicated, were diligent, the power that he would one day bestow upon them. In the old days, in those halcyon days before his life was ruined, was trampled under Calaria's foot, before he was battered and beaten and what was left of him thrown into Ravena's great engines of progress. In the old days, he would have hit the students just hard enough that it made them gasp. But now, faced with Hung, faced with his old rival, faced with what he'd become, faced with that jealous, bitter fool's true nature made manifest, faced with his inner self made flesh, Ho fully committed to his mercy blow, driving both fists forward simultaneously with the entire force of his arms, his shoulders, his legs, and his spirit fully behind them. It was a technique that he had developed meticulously over the course of his entire life. A technique that he rarely taught his students. A technique he feared could fall into the wrong hands. It was a strike directed at a rival's midsection, but one that when administered properly, when delivered effectively, sent aftershocks throughout the body of whatever fool was unlucky enough to be struck by it. Where the fists connected, they drove out the air of the body, and the aftershocks, the accompanying tremors, they worked toward the same goal. One in the chest, one in the gut, and, inevitably, if delivered properly, the blow would knock the wind out of any man strong enough to stay standing under that potent assault. And if delivered with the full force of a trained combatant, with the full force of a master, of the man who had discovered and refined this peculiar technique, then it was unfailingly fatal. Ho felt his fists connect, felt his first and second knuckles dig into Hung's flesh, felt the flesh pinch and twist as he spun his wrist slightly, the tiny flourishes that were so difficult to teach, the ones that created those signature aftershocks of pain, of suffering, of life-ending agony. But though he connected fully, though Ho, even overwhelmed by his self-made ecstasy, even breathing the rarefied air of a freshly invented god, though he knew that he had struck a devastating blow, one capable of felling any man or terrible beast that he had ever had the misfortune of meeting, he watched, shocked and horrified, as Hung took a single step back, sucked in a pained, shallow breath, and swung on him. Ho barely had time to react. In fact, he had no time to react before the blow hit him, before Hung's monstrous, filth-covered claws dug into his cheeks, creating 3 long, jagged gashes that Ho could already feel festering. He had no time to react before the blow, but he had just a moment to react after the blow. So as the claws connected with his flesh, as he winced and yearned to cry out in pain, instead of issuing a rebuttal, instead of sending out a riposte, he allowed his head to follow the attack's motion. He leapt into the air, rolling and spinning with it, minimizing the damage of an attack that, if he had leaned into it, if he had tried to stand up against it, could very well have taken his head clean off. But instead, he threw himself into the air with a spinning flourish, flailing his legs in simple, ineffectual kicks that Hung was able to block with his long, skeletal arms, kicks that did no damage, but instead did something far, far more important. They distracted Ho's opponent. A series of distracting strikes that put Hung on the defense just long enough for Ho to land, to roll quickly to the side, to put his feet beneath him, to drive his body upward, one fist over his head and another below, to lash out with yet another mercy blow. The strike connected as well as the first. Better even, as the previous attack had bestowed upon Ho further knowledge of Hung's perverted and deformed anatomy. But once again, the same as before, Hung, struck full on by the most impeccable attack of Ho's most exquisite 8-arm technique, the monster simply stepped back and shook his head, gnashing his foul, disease-laden teeth together as he drew in another pained, shallow breath, and once again swung on Master Ho. But this time, Ho was ready. He was ready before the strike. While he knew that a single mercy blow couldn't fell the monster, he had hoped that a second would do the trick. But truthfully, deep within him, he had been skeptical. He had lost faith in his abilities, lost faith in his techniques. And how could he not? How could he not? when his opponent was this hack, this joke, this up-jumped amateur, hung, master hung, and yet Ho could still not defeat him. Ho danced, and he dodged, he swayed, and he shuffled, tapping into a divine rhythm, one that he and he alone could see, but none save that fresh-faced god, that grinning, youthful demiurge recently sprung forth from the womb of Ho's mind, that none save for the godhead could truly predict. He stayed ahead of Hung's strikes. He deftly dodged. He artfully avoided each of the monster's attacks, blows, and swipes that were crude, simple, and uneducated, even by Hung's lenient standards. But as Ho stumbled from side to side, searching for an opening, searching for a way to defeat this monster, to truly defeat him, as he struggled to stay in touch with the deity, as Ho fought to maintain his divine status, he began to feel something else, to feel something growing within him, something that came from without, but nonetheless nurtured something that had always been there. He felt anger. He felt rage, and most potent of all, he felt resentment. He was Master Ho. He had discovered the 8-armed technique. He had created the 8-armed technique. He was the finest of all of Ravana's revered 7 masters. He was the only one who pursued not combat, but art. Art through combat. He was an artist, and he should be an artist still. But he had been betrayed by Caleria, betrayed by his fellow masters, betrayed by Hung, betrayed by the monster that stood here before him, complacent in its non-existent skill, perfectly content to shamble around, swinging artlessly at his foes until he simply outlasted or overpowered them. But Ho was better than this beast. Ho was better than everyone. Ho was the best. He had always been the best, and he had always known it, but he had been beaten down. He had been abused and misled. He had been tricked and manipulated. He had been forced down into the alleys, forced down into the gutters. He had been forced to consume whatever Ravana dropped to the ground, forced to hungrily devour whatever it was that his betters, no, that those that thought themselves his betters, those that mistakenly thought themselves his betters, forced to devour whatever it was that they deigned to give him. But no longer. Ho was better. Ho was the best, and he would no longer be content with scraps. As he stumbled and fell, as he rolled and righted himself, as he tumbled all around that filthy, glowing cavern, Ho felt his intoxication deepen, felt his connection with the Godhead, with that recursive demiurge created so that it might create itself, felt that connection intensify, growing in profundity. He had been chosen. He had been anointed. He was better. He was a holy warrior, and he resented, he despised anyone who would deny him what was his, deny him the status and respect that should be afforded to him. His intoxication deepened as he no longer forced himself to feel intoxicated, and rather simply gave himself over to a deep, ecstatic state, one that caused his body to begin moving of its own accord, that caused his vision to blur as the deep crystal veins of that cavern, the one that lit the area with that sickening, unnatural light as they flared in intensity, further impairing his vision, unnecessary at this point, and further stoking the flames of his resentment, buttressing the knowledge that he deserved better, that he deserved better. He felt resentment. He knew resentment. He knew that he deserved better. He knew that he should have better. He felt the power grow within him, the same power that made those crystal veins glow with otherworldly light, a power that was vicious and hungry, ambitious and cruel, a power that pulsated with rightful entitlement, with righteous entitlement. He knew that this feeling, though powerful, though unbelievably powerful, and more than that, though he was right to feel it, though he was right to be enraged by it, empowered by it, he also knew that it was dangerous. He knew that it was a flame too hot to hold, a steed too wild to tame, a blade too sharp to wield. He knew that whatever good it got him, whatever good it did for him, that it would ultimately, inevitably, destroy him. He knew it. He knew it. But he didn't care. All Ho cared about was defeating this monster, about defeating Hung, about getting what was rightfully his, what he rightfully deserved, about seizing what he had earned many times over, about reclaiming what had been taken from him, what had been stolen from him, about turning the tables, about rising up above that foul city, of making its masters, of making Caleria herself cower and beg for mercy, mercy that would not, that could not, that would never come. As Ho danced and dodged, shuffled and staggered, his striking eyes changed slightly, almost imperceptibly, as their fey green glow was joined by something else, something dangerous and wild, something that manifested itself as flecks of gold, blinking suddenly into existence and disappearing just as quickly. And Hung, swinging wildly, just as he had since his first attack. He noticed it. He not only noticed it, he recognized it as he had seen it in others and felt it grow within himself, within the beady little eyes now consumed by the gold that pulsed in unison with those glowing crystal veins. But though Hung noticed it, it was not in enough time to respond. Not in enough time to attack, to prepare for an attack, or even to retreat, because in that split second that the flecks rose to the surface of Ho's irises, in that exact moment, Master Ho hopped into the air, less a jump and more just a lifting of both his feet, as if he was held by invisible hands. And just as quickly as the gold sunk back down into whence it came, Ho shot his legs back out, driving his feet cruelly, callously, directly into Hung's left knee. The cracking noise reverberated throughout that stone cavern. It was sickening, vicious, and if Hung's wordless cries were to be believed, agonizingly painful. They both fell to the ground, But before Ho even landed, he was in the process of standing up, swinging his legs down beneath him and rolling back up into a position, not of defense, not of readied action, but of power, of promised triumph, of foretold destruction. But Hung was not so lucky. His kneecap was shattered. His long, skeletal left leg bent in an unnatural position, with shards of those degraded, graying bones sticking out of his pale, quivering flesh. Ho had let loose with a mercy blow, but one without mercy. One that left its recipient lying in the filth, drowning in his agony, overcome by suffering, clutching his leg just below the knee in an effort to staunch the blood, to slow the pain, to do anything to just make it stop. But Hung could not. Hung could do nothing at all, and he certainly couldn't do anything in the scant time allowed to him, the mere moments that he had to groan unintelligibly, his foul little rat teeth scraping against one another, the mere moments he had to try and fail to express the torment he felt, to express it in the human words that he had long ago left behind, because as he attempted to spit out his futile requests, his pleas for quarter, as he gave up on them and instead turned to curses he could no longer speak with his deformed mouth, Ho, that master of the exquisite 8-arm technique, moved toward him, not in the shuffling, irregular, drunken manner that he normally affected, but in a steady, decisive prowl. Ho looked down at Hung in disgust, with hate boiling up within him. A perversion of the martial arts, a perversion of humanity, a disgusting mockery of all that was good in life. Ho wasn't just obligated to put the creature out of its misery. He was delighted to. He was looking forward to it. He was looking forward to administering yet another mercy blow. A mercy blow without mercy, taking sweet, delicious revenge on that jealous, bitter, fat sack of filth. He paused for a moment, and he listened to Hung's ghastly moaning. He paused, ever so briefly, not to reflect, not to second-guess himself, not to consider giving this foul, filth-covered abhorrence the mercy it so clearly desired, but instead to gaze upon it, to look upon his work, to take it all in, to suck every bit of joy out of seeing one who had denigrated him, now laid low, left to suffer and die in the filth from which he had sprung. As Ho looked down, grinning sadistically, Hung, miraculously, began to find his way around those malformed jaws, the mouth filled with too many teeth and too much saliva. Improbably, impossibly, Hung maneuvered around those clashing teeth. He spat out that thick drool, and he fought to control that oversized, bloated tongue. And with tears welling up in his eyes, the gold now quickly receding away, he spoke in a terrified, cracking voice. "Oh, please." But he couldn't even finish his plea. Couldn't even properly beg before Ho lifted one leg up underneath of him and fell, like lightning flung from the heavens, driving his knee down onto Hung's long Ophidian neck. It was a mercy blow. A savage, uncouth strike. One that used one of the most punishing body parts to assault the most tender. He had taught his students they were better, that they didn't need such truculent brutality to win a fight, that to defeat their opponents artfully, not just with their soul intact, but with their spirit enriched through the fight itself. That was a far finer, far more noble victory. But that was many years ago. That was in the old days, in the halcyon days before Ho had been beaten down, had been manipulated and tricked, had been driven into the gutter, had been forced to content himself with scraps. In those days, he would have delivered a mercy blow, a proper mercy blow, that was to be sure. He would have struck this monster down without a second thought. He would have done it quickly, mercifully. But now, standing in that glowing, filth-filled cavern, there was not an ounce of mercy left within him. He had no quarter to give. He had created his god. He had given himself over to its worship, to its ecstasy, and he had dealt a killing blow, a mercy blow, but one that left its recipient, that left the poor, pitiable monster that Hung had become, that left him wheezing, struggling to pull in air through his collapsed windpipe. No. Ho had no mercy for Hung. He had been shown no mercy himself, so why should he show it to any others, especially one such as Hung, one who would have done far worse to him if given the chance? No, Ho knew the power and the danger in his choice, but he didn't care about the doom he courted, didn't care about the devil he bargained with. All he cared about, all he cared to do, was to stand over that disgusting, corpulent old fool and watch him die. Slowly. Thanks for checking out this, the best episode of SKALD yet. There are a lot of podcasts out there competing for your time, so I really appreciate you choosing to make SKALD part of your listening routine. Because there are so many podcasts out there, I need your help spreading the word about the only story that matters. And the best way to do that? Podcast reviews. Leave a good one on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, and I'll read it on the show. This one comes from Andy Dory. Do you wake up in the morning and wish you could grab some mead at the nearest tavern and go adventuring? Do you like barbarians, trolls, wizards, elves, large cats, martial arts, or centaurs? This weekly podcast blends all of the great storytelling tropes of the sword and sorcery genre while adding Aubrey's unique spin. I have been listening since day one, and SKALD hasn't let me down yet. Aubrey is a wonderful storyteller who has created an enchantingly gritty universe that offers something for every fantasy fan. Download it now and get lost in the sundered worlds. You will not regret it. I'm in the midst of planning something very cool for SKALD, but I need your help to make it happen. I'm going to be bringing music to the show. That's right, intros, outros, maybe even some interludes if it works with the episode. Best of all, it's still going to be DIY, recorded in one take, and all me, because I'm planning to get a Korg ribbon synthesizer. The thing is, this is going to cost me not just the sticker price of the synth, but also the time involved with making the music, figuring out how to use this piece of equipment. That's why I've set a brand new goal on the SKALD Patreon. Once we hit $250 a month, I'm going to start using the synth to make amazing, bizarre music to accompany the only story that matters. If you appreciate SKALD, if you want the increase in production values and weirdness that will come with some intro and outro music, maybe some interstitials too, get over to patreon.com/SKALD today. If everyone listening just gave $1, we would crush this goal. I'd have to think up new ones. Even if you can't afford to contribute monetarily to SKALD, you can still help out. Do so by telling everyone you know about it and encouraging them to listen to the show. Tag me in your social media compliments so that I can shamelessly retweet and share them. I'm Aubrey Sitterson on everything, or just head to aubreysitterson.com for links. This week's recommendation is some ripping heavy metal courtesy of Denner Sherman. Named for Michael Denner and Hank Sherman, the original guitarist for Merciful Fate, their debut full-length album, Masters of Evil, is just as shred-happy and amazing as you would expect. While you might miss King Diamond's inimitable vocals, this album is perfect for anyone who loved Merciful Fate's early albums, but was never quite as enthused with Diamond's solo stuff. Check it out. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.